Hi, I'm Brady Horton, Chief Solutions Officer for Orthogonal. Welcome to MedTech Spotlight Live. We're here at the Javits Center in Manhattan for the MD&M East conference, and my guest today is having the tables turned on him. It's Omar Khateeb.
Tables are turning on me?
Yes, because you're actually being interviewed instead of interviewing.
Oh, that's
someone.
right.
We have the biggest podcaster in MedTech, Omar Khateeb from State of MedTech. Here, he just gave a talk back in the convention center and is with us now. And we're going to ask him to share a few of the highlights of this. So the whole concept of MedTech Spotlight Live is you can't make it to every conference. And if you do, you can't meet every interesting person at the conference. So we try to select some of the best things from there and give it to you in some vignettes to hear. Omar.
Shameless plug, by the way. Orthogonal had one of the best networking dinners I've been to in a long time. I absolutely love it. So I just want to give a shout out to you and the team for doing that.
Thank you very much. We're glad you were there.
It was a lot of fun.
We're glad you were there. Omar, you had a talk and we were talking about third wave of MedTech, and it was the paradigm, the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, the computer revolution, the AI revolution. You had several waves of revolutions, but one of the really interesting things you talked about is how this work is getting so specialized and complex that in a modern digital world, you have to be agile and move faster. You're going to have to get a lot better at working with more specialized partners as opposed to saying, we do that in-house as a differentiator.
Yeah, I think this started 10 years ago even, where because of the complexity of the world that we live in, the problems that we're solving, think of it like this. If you go back thousands of years ago, like what it took to build a bridge back then is like what, you get a bunch of people, you get some materials, you build a bridge, versus now building a bridge. Think about how complicated that is just in terms of like the materials, the regulations, all these different things. So there's no such, this notion of doing it in-house makes no sense to me at all. And I think that it's not really the future MedTech story here, is that you have actually smaller teams, but you have specialized partners that help you develop and execute things. So like on the marketing side, it does not make sense to me for, depending on the size of the company, but let's say a company that does 50 million in revenue, right? And they have a sales force of say 30 to 50 people. Doesn't make sense for that company to have 10 to 15 people on their marketing team. I think it makes more sense where you have smaller marketing teams, but each marketer works with a specialized vendor on certain things. One maybe on social media and content, another one on paid ads, another one in conferences and stuff, right? Because at the end of the day, it just makes it a lot easier to execute. And if we want to talk about on the financial side, me personally, I think that there's a lot of cost savings in doing that, because you're, aside from not losing out on headcount, you're also not having to fork over more money when it comes to like benefits and equity, et cetera, all these different things.
So let's drill in on that. So we focus a lot on R&D, but I think the concept you're talking about is equally applicable to R&D, but I want to drill in on MedTech marketing as opposed to MedTech R&D for specialization. So say you've got a 10, 15 person group and I don't know, a couple $1 million budget maybe with that. Something. What does that look like between what you can do now you're on your own with generative AI that's good enough for certain things? So you walk me through that. Who's setting the strategy? How do you coordinate between those? How do you make sure you're not just paying a whole bunch of money for a vendor who's invested in you? Like all those things.
I think this is, at the end of the day, there's this art as, I mean, for me, even in my own business, I use other vendors. There's an art to getting the most out of your vendor. It's just like when you sign up to go to the gym and you have a trainer, the results are going to be really dependent on your ability to be disciplined and also get the most out of them. And again, if you pay enough for a really good trainer, they're going to drive to your house and pull you out of bed. But when it comes from the MedTech side, if you think about, even for an R&D perspective, I think we'll get to a point where rather than having a full R&D team, you're managing a team of R&D vendors. And I think the benefit about that, let's look at it like from a project standpoint, Orthogonal has probably seen use case A 10, 15, 20 times within a period of a few years, versus that head of R&D that you hired maybe have seen that use case 2 or 3 times in their entire career. And so a lot of this has to boil down to not only experience, but seeing the different things that work, seeing the failures, and then bringing those updated approaches to your project. I think that's the benefit. It's the same thing on the marketing side. When somebody comes to us to launch a marketing campaign, we've done messaging and launched strategies 10 times in a quarter, versus the company that we're dealing with, the head of marketing or the marketing manager that's there, they may have done that 2 or 3 times in their career. So it's all about this compression of time and the cycles of execution that you've done. And because of how things are today, things change so often. I know that in the R&D and product development and SaaS world, all kinds of new tool comes out on a monthly basis. In the marketing world, a lot of times the recommendations that I made strategy-wise a few months ago have changed completely.
That was so Q1.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I think this is why it's so important to work with the right vendors and, more importantly, experts in their field who have done these cycles so many times. This is why, if you look at it on the recruiting side, right? Some companies who have a great brand, they're like, we don't need to use a recruiter. You should use a recruiter because, number one, the person who's going to do recruiting in your company usually is HR. That's not what they normally do. And then when you work with an outside recruiter, their Rolodex of people who might be able to be a good fit for your company is going to be bigger. Because when you, let's say, try and search for somebody new, you don't want to hire the person who's looking for a job. You're trying to hire like top talent who's got the head down and not paying attention to things. So I think this is where like we have to shift as a company or as an industry about this dogmatic view of, oh, we do all this in-house. And then that tells me that you're actually not very good at what you do.
So let me ask you this. So the challenge on this on the engineering side is when you start to have program management and there's intersections and dependencies across your vendors. And frequently in the engineering world, if you have a hardware vendor and a software vendor, a quality vendor, you can end up with a lot of this.
Yeah, and that's tough.
So how do you, part of it is obviously you have to be good as I as the manufacturer, to be good as a program manager. How do I, as the person hiring all these companies, identify the companies that are going to be better at being part of a larger team and not just tunnel down their vein?
Yeah, it's just like when you interview people, like I think there's ways to ask and get an idea, but I think also being very candid and saying, okay, here's what our setup is. Here are the vendors that we use. We need you to be able to do X, Y, Z. I think having like very straightforward candid talks at the very beginning is going to be super important. And you have to pressure test these things because keep in mind also, at the very beginning, everybody's on their best behavior in those negotiations, right? It's only when you like sign the actual contract that you actually start working together and see how things work.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's on the other side where, just like with people, you have to be very slow to hire somebody, and then you should be somewhat fast to fire them. I think it's the same thing with vendors, which is there's a tendency to immediately hire a vendor because there's a need, and like the pain has become so big, you just hire somebody. In that case, like I would really vet people out, talk to people in terms of what their experience has been. When it comes to the vendor, also, I think like my way of pressure testing vendors myself is that I want to see in their process of when they're trying to get my business, do they come with like really specific insights that like I did not think about? And it's almost in that negotiation period that they give me free advice where I'm like, wow, I never thought of it. Because that kind of gives me an indication of what they're going to be like working together.
Your experience with somebody during the proposal is usually predictive of your experience on the project.
Yeah, and the other thing is that, again, like it's like for my agency, I have a team and everything, but like I'm leading everything. Versus a lot of times with, let's say, other vendors, sometimes there's a salesperson you're dealing with, and then you don't actually meet the team until after you sign the contract. That's when you have to say, hey, I want to meet the person that we would actually be working with and get an idea of what that's like.
Got it. So one last classic question. When you're hiring marketing people as a MedTech manufacturer, how important is it that the marketer knows MedTech as opposed to if they're a good B2B marketer or a good B2C
really good
marketer?
Question. I go back and forth on this because I think that I don't think it's as important, right? I think that it's important. I think it's good that you have MedTech experience because we live in a very regulated industry and like you can't just do anything you want. But there's a part of me where and it depends on the individual. That's the thing. That's why I try not to paint with a broad brush and say, oh, if they come from MedTech or not. Like I like to treat people on the individual level and to say, okay, is this person motivated enough and curious enough to know that this is not the space that they play in, and are they going to go headfirst into devouring as much information as possible to get up to speed? This is why a lot of times, like at least in MedTech gets very dogmatic of, oh, was this person, do they come from cardiovascular, they come from ortho? And I tell people, I'm like, look at the track record, and if they've been successful at different companies, it's almost better that they don't come from your specialty because then they come in as a fresh slate. They have no biases, nothing. And so in that case, they're going to pressure test everything, including certain directions for the company, the KOLs you're trying to get, etc. I think it's much better versus sometimes when you get somebody with a lot of experience in a specific area, at least in the marketing and sales side, they're going to come with their own biases, but at the same time, the other side of it is that they speak the language and they're able to they don't really have a learning curve to go over.
So it all depends, but it's a factor to consider.
It all depends. The only thing that I can tell you for sure is that, like, in today's environment of how things are changing, how complicated the problems that are being solved are, that it becomes more and more important to get people who are specialized in certain areas. And again, you can't hire somebody for everything. And a lot of times you're better off hiring somebody who's going to be a great conductor to orchestrate a group of vendors and teams, and hire the very best vendor for this area, best vendor for this area, all these different things, and orchestrating that. Because at the end of the day, here's the other things that when it comes to vendors, if you're working with a group and if you're not getting the results you want, you can fire that group and get another one. If you hire somebody, you can't just fire them right away, because unfortunately, 20, 30 years ago, it was a lot easier. You hire somebody that's not producing, fire them in a quarter. You can't do that these days because you're going to get sued. So I think that's the other benefit of working with different vendors.
Easier to fire a vendor than a new employee.
Yeah, exactly. And then, like, when you hire, I mean, at some point, like, you need people to just do things, right? The people who are just doing things are usually junior employees, in which case you're going to have a much higher pain threshold that you're going to have to put up with. Versus you hire a vendor, it's going to be like from day one, they have to have their act together, they have to have a very specific plan, and they're going to produce results. And more importantly, they're going to come in with confidence around a process of, okay, here's the end point that you're trying to get to. Here's where we're starting. Here's the path of how we're going to get there. Here's some questions we're going to have along the way. You're essentially spending more money to gain confidence and predictability. Versus sometimes when you hire people as a team, like, you just don't know how those pieces are going to fit together.
Yeah. So let me ask you a really unfair question.
Sure.
Do you have a metric of, if you're not firing X percentage of your vendors every year, you probably do low, and if you're firing this one, you need to do a better job on selection?
No, I don't. It's interesting you say it that way. I think at the end of the day, there's also a certain level of expectation from a vendor. You should expect great work and everything, but, like, at the end of the day, it's almost like when you hire, like when I hire employees, they're going to work hard for me. They're going to do a lot of things, but there's a certain level of how much I can expect from them because they're not an owner of my company. I am. I think it's the same thing when you're a program manager and you hire a vendor. At the end of the day, they don't own the product or the roadmap. You do. And so I think it's always important to be making sure that you're getting what you need out of your vendors. But if you're happy and things are good, then there's no need to fire a vendor. But at the same time, I think when you're not happy about things, sometimes you have to take a step back and ask yourself, okay, are we having these problems because my vendors all suck? Or is there something larger involving the company, perhaps my organization? Yeah, or is it me? Right. And I think that it's very important for people to be able to self-reflect and say that, because at the end of the day, you can burn through vendors through your career, you can burn through employees, but at some point, it's going to catch up to you, and you're going to be in a position where you spent years, and I've met people these years running away from this problem instead of correcting it yourself, and then you're going to end up getting fired because somebody's smart enough to realize that you're the problem. Right. Right. And you could have spent this time figuring out, like, hey, you know what? Maybe I haven't done a good job of aligning my vendors or my projects and teams. Maybe I'm not doing a good job of communication. Maybe I'm a little bit too reactive about things. And I think there's always this play. It's the same thing with me as a service provider on the marketing side. We have some clients, some of them are extremely disorganized. And so I have to talk to my team. I'm like, hey, I know this is really frustrating, but at the end of the day, like, they're not going to change. What can we do better as a team to make sure that our future clients are set up for success? Like, maybe we have better processes. Maybe we have, and this is maybe something I think every R&D or product manager should have. I have my own, like, list of the perfect client traits. And if they don't meet some of these things, I just don't take the client on because it's going to be a pain. I think program managers say, hey, like, here are my perfect vendor traits. Like, maybe one of those vendor traits is like, hey, I'm not going to be expecting them to work on a weekend or something, but when things go sideways, could I pick up the phone and call this person on, like, a Sunday or something, or text and be like, hey, I'm so sorry. I'm like, can I get on the phone with you? We're figure this out. Are they going to do that? Or then be like, hey, no, we're outside of hours.
Talk to you Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah. And so I think having that list and understanding reasonable expectations, what you're going to get out of the vendor, is important.
All right. Excellent. So we'll close with a different question, Omar. It's a very rich ecosystem of podcasts out there. What's the unique value prop of State of MedTech? How to get so many listeners? Like,
You know what?
I should listen if I need what?
If you need anything in MedTech, just listen to my
Anything.
Yeah, I mean, look, like we have marketing, we have sales, we have product leaders, we have innovators, it's become like the Joe Rogan show of MedTech because we just have so many categories. But I think the reason why the show has done so well is for two things. Number one, I love doing it. You can't outcompete me in terms of my level of interest of interviewing people and finding like the best stories and content. That's very hard to compete with. And I think the second thing is like we just put out a lot of volume. And we do 2 episodes a week. We try to have really big guests on the show, but we also try to have no-name entrepreneurs who just started their company because nobody's paying attention to them. I think that's one of the reasons. And if I had to guess like why people enjoy the show is just I think we do a really good job of combining both education and entertainment. I think when you do that for a show, for a podcast, like you have a winning combination.
There you go. All right, great. Everybody's encouraged. Check out MedTech Spotlight Live and check out
State of MedTech. Yeah,
There
there
we
we
go.
go.
All right. Thank you for coming in today.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for watching.